I know folks are still continuing to trickle in, so we'll give it maybe another 30 seconds or so. But for folks that are already here, we would love for you to pop in the chat why you're here. What are you thinking about? What brought you to today's session? Have you gone to perhaps a conference recently and gotten some new ideas that you hope to implement? What kind of conference or webinar or experience did you get those from? So we would just love to hear a little bit from everyone about what brought you to today's session. Just go ahead and pop those in the chat whenever you feel inspired to do so. And as we're sort of gathering those, we'll get a good sense of what the audience is looking for today. All right. So welcome, welcome. We're so excited to be here. We're so excited to have you. This is from Inspired to Implemented, making new ideas stick in prospect development. Let's head to the next slide, Christina. Perfect. So for those of you who don't know us, I'm Catherine Flaatten. I'm an Associate Vice President here at BWF Zuri. And I came up firmly in the prospect development world. I was a practitioner in that space for about 10 years before I came over to the consulting side. So I have worked with and for a whole bunch of different kinds of organizations, different sizes, different missions, and different challenges. So that's the lens that I'm bringing to the conversation today. I'm also the incoming president-elect of APRA International, so I'm very plugged into our professional association space as well. And with us today, we also have Christina.
Hi, everybody. Christina Pulawski here. I'm AVP of Management Consulting at BWF Zuri. And as my background, after a brief career as an active attorney, I've been in advancement for over 30 years, starting in research prospect management, as well as advancement services, campaign management at organizations such as Northwestern, Loyola Chicago, Art Institute of Chicago, and my own practice and at Legacy Zuri Group, and now with BWF Zuri. I am also a 6-year APRA board member way back when dinosaurs roamed the earth and chaired 3 of the conferences. So this is still the piece of the advancement profession that I'm most excited about. So I'm so glad that you're all here, and we can't wait to share some ideas and then hear some of yours. So just a quick bit of housekeeping. Thank you for sharing your ideas as we gather. I see a lot of really cool things that people are excited about, and hopefully we can get to some ways that you can actually get some traction on those. But really quickly, we asked you to put those things in the chat, but as you ask questions and as you have questions for us that we'll try to address at the end of the presentation, please put them in the Q&A feature. So Q&A, not chat from here on out. And you will receive an email with this recording within 24 to 48 hours, as well as probably some answers to some questions that we might not have gotten to. Quick agenda. This is what we're going to do. We're going to tell you a little bit about BWF Zuri, of course, so you get some context in terms of the environment in which we operate. We'll talk about prioritizing and planning, getting buy-in support, as well as other types of challenges around adoption for some of your new ideas. Really quick, with the recent merger of Legacy BWF and Legacy Zuri Group, our shared impact just got bigger. So our combined organization supports over 400 clients a year with a team of about 170. And we come together to partner with global nonprofits, as we always have, with a strength in operations that's going to be needed for the next generation of fundraising to be successful. As you can see, these are our core services. We bring together strategic, tactical, product, managed service offerings around systems, communications, donor experience, and philanthropic strategies, and securing gifts. All these things I think are very familiar to you because research, prospect management, prospect development sits at the center of all these sorts of things. So I think you have a really good lens through which to see how all those things interconnect. Some of the core services that we're known for, aside from assessments, operational reviews, as well as actual hands-on dashboard development, acting as staff augmentation, doing system implementations, designing prospect management with your frontline fundraisers, as well as your systems and your ops folks. So before we get started, let's hear what you're dealing with. You shared some of the ideas you want to implement, things like new prospecting methodology, implementing analytics, coming up with new ways to churn portfolios. So what we'd like to know is, you may have multiple barriers, but which do you think is the most significant barrier to implementation? If Lauren will launch a poll. Can't lead the.
There we go.
So you may have many, but pick the most significant barrier. We'll give it some time. Up to 70, almost 70% participation so far. Prospect development folks are always very efficient.
All right, looks like we have some results. Fairly evenly split among leadership, stakeholder support, competing priorities, and time level of effort. We've got certainly still some votes for budget and team competencies, but those are a little bit lower on the list.
Great. Thanks, everybody, for participation. And now, some of it is prioritization and level of effort. So, Catherine?
Yeah, let's get into the good stuff. So, when you come back from a conference or a webinar or some other kind of learning event, a lot of times you'll have a lot of things you'll want to do. Then you have all your day-to-day stuff, and then you have your stuff that pops up week after week, and your leadership wants you to pivot over here, and your gift officer needs you over there. So prioritization is really a constant question in our jobs of what gets to the top of the list and how do you make that decision, especially when you're trying to cover your day-to-day work and advance new ideas at the same time. So something I have found really helpful is to create an effort impact matrix to help you understand how to categorize some of your projects and ideas and activities. So I would look at a categorization of impact and effort, and you can just think big, small, medium, right, kind of t-shirt size. Give it just an estimate, doesn't need to be perfect, but think about how much effort is this activity or project or idea going to take to get off the ground, or even maybe to sustain over the long term. And then what do I think the return on that's going to be? What is really going to be the impact or value on me and my team, on the fundraising team, on the organization as a whole, if I'm able to prioritize this? And so what you'll get is some different categories. So on the top left, you've got high impact, low effort. That's ideal, right? Not a lot of work for a lot of gain. So those are your quick wins. You want to put those near the top of your list. The major projects, which are high impact and high effort, are still good, but you want to make sure that you have the resources that you need and that you chunk out those projects so that you can approach them iteratively and make incremental progress over time. And the bottom left, the nice to haves, are low effort and low impact. Those are things that you just kind of slot in as you have time, but they're not super high priority. And then the resource drainers, which are high effort and low impact, those go to the bottom of the list. Maybe they even come off the list ideally. So as you think about this impact effort matrix, think about those barriers that we talked about. Think about the timing, right? Sometimes timing makes a big difference of when you want to start or introduce these kinds of projects. We'll get into stakeholder buy-in and leadership support a little bit later, but timing is certainly a factor there as you think about when is the best moment to potentially approach some of your stakeholders. And then Christina brought to me this idea of even overs, which I just love. So Christina, do you want to explain that a little bit?
Sure. So aside from calibrating to what your time and resources allow or what is urgently needed, and you realize you might not be able to do or plan for everything. And unlike shoes, where if I have to choose between two colors, I usually get both, you might not be able to do both. And the idea about an even over, it's making the choice binary, where you have to choose one over the other when all the choices have value. Right? So an even over statement is a good thing even over another good thing. And it's the idea of trade-offs. And it's not uncommon for business leaders to claim that they can neither deprioritize anything nor make any trade-offs. But that's flawed because trade-offs are always happening in the first place. Trade-offs happen whether you notice them or not. So it can be at times helpful to involve your teams, your partners, and your stakeholders in these even over exercises. And because you might be surprised to find other views of your priorities are very different from yours. For example, would you prioritize sustainability and quality versus speed or movement? Creating tomorrow's operational or technical debt at the cost of fixing something big friction right now? Or would you prioritize stakeholder happiness versus your staff's happiness? So everybody might have a different opinion, and even if it might not help you choose, but it usually will. But it does help you understand the landscape and helps you decide not only what to do, but know what level of effort and communication and convincing and managing expectations and change management needs to be built into your plan. And that's something that we're definitely going to talk about.
Absolutely.
So planning. In this presentation, we presume you have a culture of planning in your organization, whether that means your organization as a whole or just your shop or just your business area. Ideally it all fits together, but you can plan for just yourself, inviting participation from clients and partners if they don't have their own process or if your organization doesn't knit it all together. If you don't have a culture of planning, now is the time to start. At least, I'm sure we've all been involved in strategic planning for your whole organization or just within yourself, but I'm actually thinking a little smaller. It's important to have an annual plan at least, although it's helpful to have a strategic plan for guidance as to how to prioritize. But note, one of the things you'll see at the bottom, we say your annual plan. Oh my goodness, what just happened?
We went
You,
back in time.
my DeLorean. Your annual plan needs to be distinct from any project tracking. So your annual plan focuses on business processes, infrastructure projects, departmental care and feeding. Some of it's unique to a time, some of it's regular or cyclical, but it needs to be distinct from your ticketing system, your request system, your day-to-day production, the kinds of things, the kind of tasks and responsibilities that you have to produce that is completely separate from your annual plan of how do you continue to tune and align the kinds of things that you do. So those two things are separate. But once you come up with your annual plan, you need to have ways to keep it in front of you. It's not one of those things that you do and then you look at it a year later and realize you didn't do any of it. So if you don't have a project manager role on your team or someone that acts that way, you need to at least pull the team together for at least a quarterly review of the plan. Is everything still valid? Are these still things our stakeholders want? Are these, has something subsumed it? Ideally, you review the status of all your projects and plans in your standing team meetings, which might happen weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, and just to check that whether they're still valid. Iteration is very real, and we need to be agile. And while you might be planning just for your department or your business function, you need to ensure that you have input from your partners, your clients. What will they be focusing on in the year? What new needs will they have? What are they working on? What do they care about? What will they need from you? Are they working on something similar? Frequently, everybody realizes a problem and everybody independently tries to solve that problem instead of banding together or leaving the solution to that problem, solutioning for that with the area that can do it the best, fastest, nicest. So in my shops that I've had when I was behind a desk, we would always have a planning season that started with speed planning. So like speed dating, where each of our clients and partners had 15 minutes to summarize what pressures, where their feet are going to be held to the fire, what they're going to be doing, what their big plans are, so we can calibrate accordingly and figure out when we can do things that apply just to us. Catherine, I think you were talking about, or you think you're going to talk over here. This is sort of the first thing that you should do in planning, because it does help you figure out where you can have some capacity for level of effort. So, Catherine?
Absolutely. Yeah. So mapping out your year, again, this goes back to the question of timing. We know that there are cycles, there are things that happen regularly throughout the year. If you work at a university, you might have a football season. I'm sure that feels familiar to some of you. You might have an annual gala, or you might have some board of trustees meetings. Things that you know are going to spike your day-to-day production, or might have a particular project, new parent screening, right? That happens before the new families come in. So map out those on a calendar, know where you're going to be the busiest, and then that will help you then look past that and see the white space that is still left on your calendar. And the white space is where you're able to then start plotting out and planning how you're going to make incremental progress on some of these other projects and ideas. And what I really recommend is that you intentionally and proactively schedule time during that white space. Don't just look in the calendar and say, great, I'll have time this week, because by the time you get to that week, something else will have come up, you'll have forgotten, right? Things get pushed around. So proactively put on your calendar for the rest of the year, these are the days when I am going to intentionally carve out and hold sacred some time to make progress on these. This is something that I did at my last practitioner job where at least I think I did it once a month. I would block off a Friday on my calendar. I would not take in meetings. I would not look at my email. I would turn off all of my notifications. I would set an away message on my instant messenger and just say, I am on a project day to day. If you need me urgently, you can text me, right? Give them a way to still get in touch with you. But say, I am holding this space dedicated to this project time, and I am not going to compromise on that, because otherwise it's just not going to get done. You have to make this space and you have to commit to it. And it's also best to make these plans right after you're coming off of a high energy experience like a conference, because you have the commitment and the dedication to do it then. Whereas if you try to think about it 3 months from now, when you have all, again, of your day-to-day pressures and the new things that have popped up, that memory and that energy is going to be so far back in your mind, it's going to be a lot easier to push off and say, well, I just don't have time for that anymore. Plan it now while your energy is high and while you still have white space on your calendar to be able to occupy.
Yeah, and a couple quick thoughts. I did say that your annual plan should be separately tracked from your regular production data and your requests, but that production data, if you've maintained it over time, can also help you plot out your year. Even though you might know, oh, this is when we review the parents, this is when we do our, grateful patient screening, but this is what our cycle is. If you look at your production data, you might see some spikes that you don't know quite why that happened that way. But it does help you plot out the year, because those spikes could be cyclical and they could come up again at the same time, same place, in the coming year. And I
Yeah.
do say that making the plan and actually starting to break down what are the steps we need to take and how do we break this down and how do we scope it, that's actually getting some of it done. And that really extends the honeymoon period of the energy that you get when you get these ideas that have really inspired you.
Yeah. And I just want to note really quickly, we have a question that came in. Do you want to take that now, Christina, or do you want to wait till the end?
Let's wait to the end unless it's
Okay.
unless it's quick and easy.
I think let's park them till the end. So guys, definitely put your questions in and know that we're going to get to them at the end. And if we don't get to any, we'll follow up with you.
Great. Thank you. All right.
Okay.
So if your greatest challenge, many of you said time, level of effort barrier, and that can be for a number of reasons. That could be because of the size of your team. Everything is connected. Looking at your year in those monthly or quarterly chunks, as Catherine mentioned, really helps with the time period. In terms of level of, because if you're trying when you're already overloaded, it's just so discouraging. You don't really want to pick it up again. But when you're fresh and you have some time blocked to do it, that it's just helpful for getting some traction. In terms of level of effort, and if the t-shirt size of your project is large or extra, extra large or 2XL or 3XL, it's the eat the elephant one bite at a time. How can we break this down? How can we make this iterative? So a project plan helps you see things in phases and chunks. If you think about one of the biggest projects we do regularly, it's a software implementation. We're talking 2 years, or more to get all this done. But certainly it's done in sprints, it's done in phases, and being able to see that really helps break it down into and helps you celebrate the iterations and that level of effort. Having that annual and sub-project plan helps keep that whole project in front of everyone while you're attacking the individual pieces, and helps you celebrate that incremental progress that you're making. So, for example, if you're introducing a new prospect identification methodology, doing the vendor selection for a screening or modeling tool may be one part of it. And then a sub part of that might be coming up with your requirements or your demonstration scripts for your vendors. All this is before you get to know how it impacts your business processes or prospect description, but you are moving the needle on getting stuff done as well as educating yourself on that.
Absolutely. And we sort of anticipated that getting support and buy-in would probably be another big barrier for a lot of folks. So as you're thinking about that, some of the key ways that we found to do this successfully, first is to think about starting something or framing something as a pilot or a trial. This makes it seem a lot less risky to those who you're asking to come along on this journey with you and support you, because they know that it's finite, right? There's an end date. So if it doesn't work, we don't have to continue it. It also isn't necessarily going to be the entire department or the entire division. You can start with a smaller group of individuals and test it out with just that group, so that again, if it doesn't work, you haven't affected everybody's work. It's just a small group then that needs to go ahead and pivot. But they knew that, right? Because they went into that knowing that could happen during the pilot or the trial. Another key piece of this, though, is to know what your measurements are going to be before you start. You have to know how you are going to measure success and to think about how is that measurement going to resonate beyond just me, but also with the other folks who I need to get the buy-in and support. So this is really getting into the mentality of your other stakeholders and partners, thinking about what is it that they really care about, like Christina was talking about earlier. What are going to be their priorities and their challenges and their concerns, and then framing your idea around how this is going to help them, how this is going to make things easier or better for them, or how it's going to contribute in some way to their success. So you need to draw that through line for your stakeholders so they really understand how this is going to affect them in a positive way. And then measure that and then report back to them, right? So that they can see, in fact, it did, or maybe it didn't, or maybe it had a different effect that we weren't even anticipating, because that can happen too. So the last piece is the idea of a proof of concept. So things can make sense sort of on paper to us, but a lot of times we still feel some reservations about like, well, it makes sense on paper, but I just don't know how that's going to look in practice. So if you do these pilots and trials and you have your measurements, this is what provides that proof of concept that says, look, this idea actually does work in practice, or here are the keys to making this idea work in the way that we need it to. And so that's how you build your base of support then to push that idea out and expand it even further and take it to the next level, which is another way of iterating.
Right. And just a quick note, when we're thinking about pilots or trials or proofs of concept, there's a bunch of different ways to slice that off from a full-blown rollout, right? It can be applied to a certain person on your team or a certain fundraiser, for example, that you're partnering with. It could be a period of time. It could be, oh, on Mondays we do it this way and Tuesdays we do it this way. I wouldn't do it I wouldn't do that. But, there's lots of different ways to slice and dice things. So you're really only doing a certain percentage or a certain scope of something rather than returning the whole battleship to something new.
Yeah. But you're letting folks experience it, right? Because seeing is believing.
Yeah.
Okay. So our next section is really going to be focused quite heavily on stakeholder and leadership support and buy-in. So we're going to talk and think about when do you need approvals and permissions and from whom, and how do you set yourself up to get those approvals and permissions. I have a colleague and friend who used to tell me, design the outcome you desire, which sounds a little Machiavellian, but I just think of it as being strategic, right? Especially when you need someone to say yes to you. Make it really easy for them to say yes. So we'll talk a little bit about how to do that. We'll also talk a little bit about making sure that you are not working in a vacuum and that you are engaging your colleagues and your stakeholders at the very least so that they feel represented, right? You may not take every idea or every suggestion or every desire that someone expresses to you and integrate it, but if you at least have the conversation, that will ensure that people know that you heard their perspective and you can explain why you did or didn't integrate that perspective in a particular way. There's a bunch of different ways that we can manage change because a lot of these projects and ideas are change-based, right? That's fundamentally what we're talking about. So we'll talk about a couple of different options and frameworks for how to do that in an intentional way. And that's part of planning too, right? Is planning for the change management piece. We'll talk about adoption and teaching and the difference between training versus teaching, and how do we get folks to not only adopt in the beginning, but to sustain that adoption over the long term. We'll talk about how to make sure that you're managing your relationships with your leadership and stakeholders and partners, again, over the long term, through the life of the pilot and into the long-term implementation, so that's successful. And then finally, we'll talk about assessing relevance and making sure that what you're doing is, again, relevant to your partners and your stakeholders and leadership. So really all of this to sum up, this is the human side of everything that we're doing, which is sort of the hidden or invisible part of a lot of the work that we do. It's working with other humans. It's managing other people's feelings and ideas and reactions and desires and challenges and integrating all of that into how we are approaching these projects and ideas that we want to implement. So with that,
Well, and just another quick point is
Yeah,
that this is integral to your planning, to successful planning. I remember, for example, with an early client that I had, we were introducing the concept of unified prospect management at a complex, siloed university with a high level of independence across its member schools. And the prospect management scheme, it was going to be complex, but it was easy to see what it should be. But we budgeted literally 2 years for stakeholder involvement and getting buy-in, even though it was mandated at the highest level of leadership. It was an I told you so and you have to do it this way. We still needed to budget intentional time to bring everybody along with us. Otherwise, it would just die on the vine. So any pilots that you do, any early stages or scopes or chunks that you do is going to give you some data that will help you calibrate how much time you need to allocate to these, as Catherine said, these invisible human tasks that need to happen. And do not underestimate it. When you think about the grid that Catherine shared earlier, and you talk about complexity, anything that involves humans raises the level of complexity, and do not discount how much that can be.
absolutely. Okay. So thinking about your leadership and your stakeholders, you want to think about how you are building and making your case, again, in a way that you know will resonate with these folks. So think about what you know about them, what they're likely to care about, but also how they like to be communicated with. Some folks are good with a paragraph, some really prefer sharp bullets. Some are very motivated by an infographic or some kind of visual. Some you need to talk to in person. They're not going to look anything on paper, but if you have an in-person conversation or a phone conversation, that's really what sways them to think about sort of going along with you. So think about how you're going to build and make the case. How are folks going to take that? How do they make decisions? Is it the last person that they've talked to? I think that recency bias can be really real. And think about, when do you need to ask permission versus when do you need to say something like, this is what we're planning and why, this is what we're going to need from you. If you have questions or if you want us to pause, please let us know. Otherwise, we're going to move forward with XYZ on this date, right? So it's sort of not exactly asking for permission, but still giving somebody an opportunity to step in and say, hold up, I have questions, or I think we need to think about this differently. And so different leaders and different stakeholders, you can frame that differently. Permission is probably pretty slim, the number of folks you need to ask permission, but you may still want to give that kind of opportunity to some other stakeholders. Another good way to get support is through influence and networking. So this is, again, sort of the softer skills and the softer side. It's less direct and less formal, but we all know, people have relationships at work, and certain folks in our organizations often seem like they're able to get things moved or get things done more efficiently and more effectively than others. And a lot of times that's because they have really good influencing skills. So think about, are there folks with good influencing skills in your network who are close to the people who you need to persuade, who you can tap into, and who could maybe be advocates on your behalf? Or what kind of influencing skills might you have? Or could you build up your influencing skills and build up some of your relationships so that when it comes time to ask somebody for support, that ask is a lot easier to build off that existing relationship. It's also helpful to demonstrate that you have flexibility in your plans and to show that you are interested in aligning your vision with that of your leaders and your stakeholders. So to say, again, this is what we're envisioning and why, this is what we're hoping to accomplish. We believe this is the best way to go about it because XYZ. How is this landing, right? Do you think that we need to adjust anything? What might I be missing or not seeing that you can see from your perspective that I should integrate into my plan? And that really helps, again, make sure that folks feel like they're a part of the process and it's happening with them and not to them. So they're much less likely to resist if they feel like they have a little bit of input and see that you're willing to take that and be flexible with them. I'm not going to spend too much time on change management principles and adoption because we're going to get into the details on some subsequent slides there. But just, again, change management is all part of the planning process, and it has to be an intentional piece. It can't just be something that you sort of address as it comes up or as you go along. It needs to be pre-planned. And the betas and adoption, the betas are like your pilots and your trials, and the adoption piece is not only the early adoption, but the long-term adoption. So we'll hit those next.
Yeah, and I do want to just underscore a lot of the theme behind what Catherine was running down, which is so some of the stakeholders might be within your own team, right? They might be you are having your own team adapt to a new way of doing their work, perhaps, or adapt to a new tool, but also thinking about external relations, your fundraisers, your leadership, your other partners, your partners in advancement services, or your data folks. Intentional relationship management should be something that's built into your annual plan in terms of how do you keep in touch with your folks in the same way that we have intentional relationship management between fundraisers and prospects and donors. Your team needs to have intentional relationship management with the most important partners, stakeholders, clients, and leadership as well. So just underscoring that piece.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay, so this framework is one that I talk with a lot of my clients about, and it's called the three types of power. You might see some different labels out there, but this is basically what it boils down to. So there's three main ways that people have and exert power and influence at an organization. The first is based on their position, and it's because I'm the boss, because I said so. It's going to happen. And that's a pretty legitimate form of power, right? Like when the VP says, I need this, then the VP usually gets this. However, like Christina said, it kind of only goes so far, especially when we're talking about new ideas and implementation. It's actually surprisingly common for folks to sort of make a show of implementing based on positional power, but there's some sort of passive resistance that happens, right? And that builds over time if there isn't that buy-in, and power isn't sort of influenced and wielded in other ways. So those other ways are expertise power and relational power. The expertise power is the idea that I'm an expert in this area, and so I know more about it than you. So you're more likely to listen to me and to buy into what I'm saying because you know that I have that expertise. So I think a good example here is going to the doctor, right? You don't listen to your doctor because they're your boss. You don't listen to them usually because they're your friend. Maybe they are, but probably not. But you do listen to them because they know a lot more about science and medicine than you do. And so you'll be more willing to take their advice. And then the third kind is the relational power. And so that is based on a trust relationship. This is saying, because you know that I care about you and I have your best interests in mind, I'm going to share some advice with you and you're going to listen to me because you trust that it's coming from a place of honoring me and from a place of good intention. So this is like your best friend, right? Your best friend isn't your boss. Your best friend might not even be an expert, but your best friend really cares about you and wants to make sure that you come out of the other side of whatever this is in a good place. So these are the other kinds of power and influence that you can wield besides just that positional power. So a lot of times when you think about prospect development and changes that you may want to make, especially in prospect management, you may not have the authority to say, I'm the boss, I'm in charge, so we're doing this. But you may be able to say, I am an expert in this area. And you may also have some relationships that you've built up that say, we're friends. You trust me. You know that I'm trying to do the right thing. And so that combination of exercising those kinds of power can really help you move some things forward, even when you can't say, just do it. All right, I'm going to hit change management here. There are lots and lots of different kinds of change management philosophies out there. We could probably spend a whole day or more on that. There's programs and certificates and all kinds of things that you can get. This one is one of my favorites because I think it's really simple and it's easy to remember. And I think it's also really effective. So this comes from the book Switch, How to Change Things When Change is Hard. It is one of the 3 books that I recommend to almost every single one of my clients. So go get a copy. I promise I don't get royalties. But the idea is that in a change management effort, everyone has in their mind a rider, an elephant, and a path. And so the rider is the logical part of your brain that understands the rational basis for a change, right? If we do this, then this will happen and that will be better. Very straightforward. But the rider is trying to control, they're sitting on top and trying to control this very large, very emotional elephant that does not care about the logic. The elephant only responds to emotional impulses, desires, fears, motivations, right? All of those emotional feelings that go along with the change and say, but if we do this, what's going to happen to that? But if I change this, I'm worried that I'm going to lose something that's really important to me. Or I don't know what this is. And the unknown creates fear in me. And so I'm responding to that. So I'm trying to constantly go in the direction of those emotional impulses. And the rider gets exhausted by trying to control that emotional elephant. And the last piece is the path. So the path are the systems that you set up to make compliance with the change really easy and deviation from the change really difficult, right? So the elephant and rider can't just charge off on their desire paths or turn around and go back to the old path. The path that you set up and the guardrails and the fences and the signposts and all of those things keep the rider and the elephant moving in the same direction towards that change. So in change management, you need to speak to all three things. You need to have a very sound logical argument that the rider can appreciate and understand. You need to have anticipated what the emotion of the elephant is likely to be, both on the positive and the negative. What would make the elephant feel great about this, and what would make the elephant feel really badly about this? And proactively address those emotions as you are planning and talking about and socializing your change. And then the last piece is the path. How are you going to set up systems that make it very easy for people to choose the change or to go along with the change? And so you're not necessarily cutting off their other options, but you're making the change easier and more appealing than any of the other options that they might be considering. And so that's the effort that keeps the change moving forward, is when you address all three proactively, intentionally, and consistently along your change management effort.
Yeah, and I would stress that whether it's this change management framework or, as Catherine alluded to, there's dozens and dozens of others that you can take classes, you can get certification in them. The idea is finding one that aligns with your organization, or one that maybe already be in use at your organization. Your organization might have a change management office, either in advancement or advancement services or elsewhere. But the idea is that whether you do it formally with with grids and spreadsheets and lists and analyses and so on and so forth, even if it's a very small change that you're just introducing with maybe one person or maybe just with a few team members, always think through whatever steps in the framework that you've adopted, because it's a very small investment of time and mental effort that will save you a lot of tears later on, because it makes you at least consider things, and it creates that empathy, and it creates that idea to, as an attorney, the one thing that screwed up my way of thinking for the rest of my life, but which makes me a good manager, is that I always think about how is the other side going to argue me against whatever I want to say. And that's not whether I'm right or wrong. I'm being hired to argue a certain thing, but I understand how to basically see that point of view, understand that point of view, and then not necessarily combat that point of view, but meet that point of view where it needs to be. So any change management should actually introduce that way of thinking for even things that might seem routine for you. And the last piece is the biggest piece of change management, as I think for a lot of folks, is adoption, and as particularly in our world where we might be driving adoption for a new usage of a system, or for a new system entirely, or for a new tool, or for a new methodology. And people always call this training, which really makes my eye twitch. There's part of part of executing change is driving that adoption through education, and I think we can all agree that I think education can pretty much solve almost anything, can make anything happen. But the idea is to distinguish between what is training and what is teaching. To me, training is things that are creating muscle memory. It's what when we're training on systems, it's what I call buttonology: click here and then click there. And you need both. Teaching is explaining the why. It's understanding the business process. It's really getting someone to be, if not an expert, very comfortable with, here's what I'm doing, here's what I'm trying to accomplish, we're all trying to get to the same place. So some of the things, if you're trying to create the training plan, then any exercises or any techniques that encourage repetition, that you have job aids or quick reference guides or hover over text in your system. Those are things that help training. It helps reinforce muscle memory. Guided automation, your CRM or your other tools might be configurable to keep people on that path, as Catherine alluded to. And then centering on the users, grouping users by, hey, you all do the same thing in a way, and we're all going to learn exactly the steps and the muscle memory to do it. And you're going to do it this way until you're deemed expert enough to know when you can deviate from it. The teaching piece is really business focused. So you have business focused teachers. If you're doing something with prospect management and how you enter opportunities in your system, for example, it's not necessarily the person that is maintaining the system. It really needs to be a fundraiser, the fundraiser's boss that says, here's why I need this pipeline information to make strategic decisions. It's design thinking. It's meeting every user in terms of how do they learn? What do they need? What's in it for them? It's that empathy, that empathetic approach, and then accommodating multiple learning styles. So, that light bulb is going to go off for people at different times in different places and in response to different kinds of interaction with whatever process or tool that you're trying to introduce. But you need to meet everybody where they are and have that light bulb go off at some point. So think about those two things almost separately and then build whatever rollout you have to gain adoption for a new way of doing business or a new tool or system. Budget. Um, if budget is your main barrier, um, it's really all about getting people to an investment mentality or finding opportunities to demonstrate upside or return on investment, right? So your ROI needs to find the most direct link to revenue generated or savings, right? That's the most simple thing. Is this going to be sort of a net zero thing that you're trying to accomplish? If not immediately, then eventually. Or is it going to be, am I going to have return on investment? And if so, how long is that going to take? Um, so can you measure that ROI in terms of person time spent, for example? A lot of people don't think about um, um, how long it takes someone to do something in terms of dollars, but being able to translate your staff time into dollars is incredibly helpful. Um, Sometimes it's realizing that lost opportunity cost. We can identify this many more prospects with the time saved, or gift officers will be able to make X many more contacts or outreach connections, resulting in this many more solicitations and this many more gifts per year, times your average gift size. Being able to calculate ROI on those sorts of things is essential, and being able to have the data from your own organization, which hopefully you can get at in terms of on average, how many contacts does it take before a major gift officer can actually make a solicitation? And what percentage of those are successful? And if you had, and how much time does it usually take? And what is your average gift size for people that respond to gift officers at different levels and tranches? So being able to have those averages and figures really helps you calculate the ROI of that sort of a butterfly flapping and something happening across the world. Someone being able to make one more visit a month, what's the impact on that if gift officers don't have to do this because this friction has been removed or they have a better prospect in their portfolio? Will we be able to replace two tools with one? If you don't have this tool, it will take this much more time per incident. Or if we miss identifying these prospects, oh my goodness, I think
That scroll's getting away from you.
I think it's just haunted. Um, Anyway, so for example, so, what are the trade-offs? What might you give up if you get this investment? And actually, that can be a really good conversation for you to have with your team as well. Will getting something new help you stop doing something that you probably shouldn't be doing or doing something inefficiently that you shouldn't be doing that you wanted to get rid of for a long time, but this is the really big bang opportunity. Can you scale down the scope of your project to fit your budget? Can you screen a smaller file? Can you think differently about these things? This is where those pilots help. You can use the pilots to help demonstrate the ROI. You can use those initial trials or samples to demonstrate the ROI if you go into it intentionally and measure them. I think one of the most frustrating things I see is people like, oh, we get like a week's trial on blah, blah, blah tool, and they just kind of hand it out to the teams like, go play with it. It's like, well, how are you planning on using? Are you measuring that it takes fewer clicks? Are you measuring that it takes shorter to do this? And multiply that out by how much you have in your production history. All that sort of stuff, all that data helps you do those kinds of calculations. If your decision maker or if your budgetary authority responds to that kind of data, and very frequently they do. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's just, hey, who else is doing that? Great, I'll sign off. But frequently when it comes to budget, it comes to show me the money, show me the data. When you're making the case, understand those decision-making styles, like how to demonstrate value. What is of value to your leadership? Leadership might not care how long it takes a researcher to do blah, 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 because, that's infinite, even if you try to show that. But if there is an impact on a fundraiser's time, that might be the golden arrow. Is it frontline time? Is it accuracy? What are the sensitivities that your leadership perhaps have, or your budgetary decision makers have inherited, perhaps? What are their landmines that they're trying to avoid? Is it is it accuracy? Is it speed? Is it remediating quality? Is it basically getting out of a bad reputation about, oh, everybody knows that that stuff is wrong, or we can't depend on this? Are you trying to remediate that? And is that going to get to the heart of what they value and what they see as insurmountable? Um, you may have to get creative when it comes to getting really, are there other budgets that can share in this? Is this shared return on investment across other business areas, other lines from other departments? For example, you can also think about how can you look at open positions that need to be backfilled, and you're backfilling them with tools or with outsourcing or other ways to make the team more efficient. One of my colleagues told a relevant example. He was having an office renovated, and there was no budget line for, I think, things like waste baskets and all sorts of other accessories, but there wasn't a line for art. And so they just bought decorative everything on the art budget line. That's a bit of an extreme example, but I think you will find that with your partners and stakeholders, you might be able to find collaborative budget solutions if you look hard enough, and then think about your salary dollars and what if sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, but sometimes salary and operational dollars can be funged and swapped, and thinking about how you might be able to creatively find funds that way. Catherine, any notes there?
I would just reiterate, Christina, what you said about sort of averages and estimations. I think I a lot of times see our prospect development friends get really hung up on getting exact numbers because that's just the kind of people that we are and how our brains work. You don't have to do that here as long as you have a reasonable sense of what this is going to save you or how much revenue this is going to generate extra. And you can back up that estimate or that range, right? It could even be a range, not a specific number. But if you can back that up with a methodology that makes sense, that's really what you need to start moving forward. And if folks ask you for more specifics, you can try to get more specific after that. But don't let the lack of a down to the penny number stop you from trying to estimate savings or revenue.
Really important point. And the last thing is team competencies. And if you don't have the competency on your team to fully implement something, consider some of these options. So I know many of you there are constraints definitely to be considered. There are only certain things that you can add to a job description before things have to be regraded. You may not be able to ask people to do things, but there some places at some places and in some situations you might have some flexibility. So think about what is possible at your organization. Can you provide upskilling and professional development as part of the plan, right? Is someone curious about using the following analytics tools? Is someone curious about, um, you know, the, you know, enhancing how they interact with AI prompts? If that's intentional, you can actually have that upskilling as part of the plan. So by the time you get to that piece of the project plan, you will have someone with at least a basic set of competencies. Of course, you can always outsource. You can have someone build models. You can have someone write your reports, or offloading your bulk work so the people inside are doing that work if it's more sensitive and it's a better career path for those people to advance. You might want to look for those skills and competencies in unusual places across your own organization. There might be people working in other departments. Of course, in your other advancement services roles, they might have those competencies and may already be working on things that you're trying to implement internally. But you also might find super users and superpowers amongst people just out of their own personal interest, and people that are looking for fun projects to do, or fun ways to spend their time, and people that they want to advance. And the last thing I want to say is, if this is regularly your main barrier, you may be facing a larger question. Does your shop's organizational structure, job descriptions, grades, silos? Does it align with the greater needs of the department as it continues to evolve? Is it time to update what you and your team do, who does what, and how you're organized to better align with how frontline fundraisers work, how advancement services, how what jobs live where, how things might be siloed, and so on and so forth. If you're running into this regularly, maybe it's time to step even further back and think about a reorg that might be way overdue. And no time like the present to actually start that conversation and see what positive impact it could have on your team and the people that make it up. Catherine, any samples?
I think I would just add that outsourcing. I think sometimes people think outsourcing is for things that you can't do in house because you don't have the skill or you don't have the platform or technology or whatever, and that's true. But outsourcing can also be great capacity relief, right? It can be stuff that you could absolutely do in house, but it's less worthy of your time than some of these other projects that you want to do. So if you think about it, a hospital, if you've got a heart surgeon and you spend their time stitching up cuts in the ER, like, can they do that? Sure. Is that the best use of their time and skills, or would they be better used in the operating room doing quadruple bypass surgery, right? So I would just encourage you to think broadly about what is worth outsourcing so that you can make the most of your own time and your skills as an in-house employee.
And I do want to go back to where we actually started this conversation in terms of encouraging having an annual plan and mapping your year to find the white space. Sometimes there doesn't seem to be a lot of white space, but are there things that they're all the same type of thing? And if you took that out, there would be an amazing amount of white space there where you can really get some stuff done. If those things are outsourceable, then that is something to consider as well. Because if you took all the, oh my gosh, it's the football entertaining, and we had, no matter what we do, we still have to generate these things that they won't take in an automated way. Um, Great, let's find someone else to do that. That could be, when I say outsourcing, it doesn't necessarily mean to be contractual outsourcing. It could be, but it could be, are there admins, interns, whatever, that can do that, that live somewhere else, that have a vested interest in this being successful? Can you outsource within your organization to actually create that white space to make room for these impactful projects that will actually be paying dividends years and years into the future in terms of more efficient operations? So the last thing that we want to do, if we can, or the second to last thing we want to do, we want actually like to get your thoughts again. Lauren, if you'd like to launch the survey. It's actually two surveys in one. Um, so thinking about different prospect development. So as a prospect development director, you want to implement a new tool for prospect identification. With, sorry, one being the hardest, I guess you mean rank the types of challenges. So put these in rank order situationally. So one is the most difficult, five is the least difficult. We've still got people coming in. Rank order is hard, right? It takes a lot longer than just a quick one answer. But it's fascinating to watch these bars change. Lauren, do you want to end it now? I think oh, no, we got a couple more, right?
That's right.
So leadership and budget and competing
Mhm.
priorities. I can see that.
If you combine one and two, it looks like time and level of effort is is a big concern as well. Team competency is not so difficult. Yeah, that makes
Yeah,
sense. All
yeah,
right, should we do the last one?
yeah. So you want to, this is the same one.
Is that?
Mhm.
No.
Uh,
We do
let's
have a,
let's read
go ahead.
this as you as the prospect development director, everyone paying attention, want to change portfolio size guidance. Changing portfolio size guidance. With one is the hardest, rank the challenges you would encounter.
I think while you're thinking about that, I think the idea here that Christine and I were thinking of is that when you think of research, often it's around tools, methodologies, systems, right? And when you think of prospect management challenges, it often tends to be more about stakeholders and humans, right? A little bit more that human side of change. So it's just interesting to sort of think about how your challenges and barriers might flex and change based on the kind of project or idea that you're trying to implement and whether that falls more into the prospect research realm or the prospect management realm. Oftentimes we see a shift in the kinds of challenges that rise to the top.
Absolutely agree. And we do have just a couple more minutes left, so I just want to make sure that Catherine, you get to cover this.
Sure, yeah. So the last piece that I wanted to make sure that we talked about is you're thinking about how do I move forward all of these ideas and keep the energy and momentum going after a conference. And one of the big answers that we haven't really talked about yet is to work your network, right? So certainly after a conference, speakers and vendors are more than happy most of the time to talk to you about questions that you have or share slides if you didn't get to see something. You can contact them on the conference app if it's still live, email, LinkedIn, their website, right? There's lots of different ways to get in touch. So I would encourage you to not be shy about that. I would also think about if you don't have a peer basket group, to start forming one. So think about who are the peers to your organization or maybe aspirant peers who you're curious about how they're handling probably some similar challenges that you're experiencing. Make friends with the prospect development folks who work at those organizations and form a group, form a network yourselves so that you can call on each other and say, what are you doing about this? How are you handling that? And then, of course, I always have to plug the APRA exchange, formerly known as Prospect L, sometimes still known as Prospect L. But if you're not there, it's a free way to access the prospect development community in APRA. There's lots of different categories and communities that you can post your questions and ideas to.
Right. I know we've just got a minute or so, but oh, sorry, skipping over. Go ahead, Catherine.
Well, before we get there, yeah, we've just got perfect. Go ahead. We've got a couple of questions here. We are currently assessing project management and planning level of effort versus ROI, especially looking at the amount of time staff spend in meetings versus in production. And they want to know if we can elaborate on making culture of planning central to all standing meetings. So while we're thinking about making culture planning central to all standing meetings, if you, the participants, could just tell us if there's anything that you are interested in learning more about. These are some of the things that we've touched on today, and we'd be happy to chat with you more about those. Or if there are other topics that you want to see in a future webinar.
Yeah,
So go
and
ahead and pop that in.
Yep, and it sounds like we have less than 1 minute to address Aaron's question about ROI of of planning and having
Culture of planning, yeah.
a culture of planning and project management and meetings and the ROI on that. I don't know how many of you are of an age, but if you remember the book from the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Baisley Frankweiler, there was a famous quote at the end that Claudia says, 5 minutes of planning is worth 15 minutes of just looking. I think that planning, yes, planning can take a long time, but it is an investment in the same way of an investment mentality. I know that if you have planning tools, it doesn't have to be, it can be a spreadsheet, it can be something like Smartsheet or Asana or Trello or whatever, blah, blah, blah. But part of it is to look at what are your standing meetings for? What do you want to accomplish in them? I know that in the standing meetings, there were always a couple standing parts of the agenda. And is that, are we meeting our deadlines? What is, not necessarily it's not a finger wagging nagging, uh, uh, concept. It really is what is standing in our way to getting our work done? What is our work? And are we spending time on the right things? And then when you think about it that strategically, I think that you know, I can't stress enough the benefits of that. So I know in standing meetings that I have in my departments, we look at our production, like what did we get done? What's come in? What does our pipeline look like? Who needs to help whomever else? What is this data telling us? And then we looked at our project saying, it's August. We said that we were going to start on this project by August. Is that still valid? What do we need to do? How do I, as a manager, need to clear the way for you to be able to work on this, or how much load should I be taking on? How do we adjust our project plan? But if your culture keeps like, oh, you found out afterwards that the deadlines made whooshing sounds as they went by, that needs to be addressed in somehow, and you need to calibrate differently. Catherine, anything else to say there?
No, I think we're good. We're a minute over. There was one other question about the other books I recommend, so I put those in the Q&A, but quickly, they're The Trusted Advisor by Maester, Green, and Galford, and Nudge by Thaler and Sunstein.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for your time. Thank you for your questions and participation. I hope you take away some of these reads, and can't wait to hear what you guys are doing over the next year when you make all your dreams come true.
Thank you so much, everyone.